economic and environmental costs, so the cost of putting the infrastructure in and the sort of the loss of the vegetation to put the suburbs in. And we're moving to a 50-50 split for greenfield and infill. So that's been the target in the planning strategy, and I think we've review the planning strategy to see whether or not that should be a greater split going towards infill development. 81% of our housing is single dwelling, but that demand is changing. Approvals, we're given that. We've also got the approvals of apartments is dominating. So there's more apartments that are approved than single dwellings at the moment. Low-rise multi-unit development is less prevalent. And this is what's known as the missing middle. So missing middle is basically you've got single dwellings on one side and you've got multi-storey apartments on the other, and you've got things like secondary residences and dual occupancies, townhouses, row houses, and that sort of low-rise multi-unit development. That's sort of not what we're hearing is not being provided for to meet the needs of the community. And this is something that exists in cities around the world. This sort of missing middle. It's more economical to build a single dwelling and a multi-storey apartment, but that type of housing doesn't always suit everybody's needs. So with this sort of background, here's some examples as well of other ways of living besides the traditional houses. So things like duplexes and triplexes. Duplexes are quite common in the older areas, but we don't build them anymore. Same as we have the old cottage blocks and things like that aren't being delivered. Gungahlin is obviously different for sort of terrace housing. There's a lot more of that sort of medium scale residential being built in Gungahlin compared to the rest of the city. So we thought we'd put together this discussion paper to ask people what kind of housing they would like to live in. We were hearing from people that they were wanting to look at co-housing, for instance, where you might share some of the facilities in a dwelling. You might have a shared garage or shared, some people prefer to have their own kitchens and things like that, but some of the shared facilities, maybe being able to unit title them. People desiring to age in place, but in their suburb. There's a lot of research to say that if you're sort of aged within your local community, you're generally a lot happier. But people are finding that if they want to move in their suburb, there's nothing available for them to move into. And also just the economic viability of medium density housing. We've also heard from people who have approached us to say, particularly in the RZ2 zone, which is the residential core zone, that the figures don't stack up to actually be able to deliver that sort of slightly higher density housing. So we were being told all these things, and then we wanted to test, well, is that, I suppose people who approach us and sort of call us up or send us emails have obviously got a strong interest in it, but we wanted to find out what the rest of the community thought. So we developed this paper to look at, actually I'll go back to this one for a while. So it goes through the background, as I've said before, the constraints that we're facing and what we need to look at. The paper looks at, explains the different residential zones that we've got, from the RZ1 suburban zone to the RZ5 high density residential zone. And it talks about what sort of things are seen as being barriers to development. We've found that, so as I said, with RZ2 zones, we've got provisions in place to allow sort of a medium level of multi-unit development, but it's not being built as often as we would have thought. And then we were asking, well, why is that? Is it because of the planning rules that we have? Is it because of the cost of the land? Is it sort of the cost of construction, for instance? So these are the things we're trying to find out from people. So in this process, we're sort of looking at the whole community, so existing residents or homeowners. We're also looking at future homeowners. So we went to CIT yesterday to talk to some of the students, starting to say, well, what type of housing do they might be looking at rental accommodation at the moment or student accommodation, but in 10 years' time, what type of housing would they like to live in? Because we'd need to make the changes now for them to be able to live in that in the future. We're working with the ACT government architect, community councils like yourselves, the industry associations, planning and architecture professionals, the Real Estate Institute and sector and the building construction. So another thing that we've heard is things like, I've been told by people who've approached our team, say people don't want to have, say, a larger apartment, so 3 or 4 bedroom apartments. No one wants to buy them, but I'm told by other people saying that they're the first ones to sell. So again, part of this discussion paper is to work out, well, what is, obviously there's no exact correct answer, but what sort of the range of options people are wanting. So we're doing the engagement. Stage 1 is this discussion paper. So we're going out, so we've got it online on the Your Say website. So we're going out to kiosks around town. Today we're in Woden. We're in Gungahlin Marketplace next Wednesday. We've been out to CIT. We're going to Belconnor Markets on Saturday. We're going out to the Canberra show. We're having a workshop on the 26th of February to talk through it. And then we'll collate the comments. Another key component of this piece of work is, so we've got the housing choices paper, and we've also got a demonstration housing component of it. So what that will look at is testing some of the provisions, so looking at what we might change and actually having that constructed so people can see what that might look like on the ground. Because what we also hear from people is saying that they don't mind so much having medium density housing as long as it suits the area that they're in and as long as it's designed well and built well. So I suppose what we want to test is how can that be done and what ways would we help regulate that better than we do currently. And so that might also test things like sustainability measures in the housing and potentially affordable dwellings, or even a different funding model. So there's different things like co-housing and ones where the people invest in the project themselves rather than going through banks, and that can lead to being cheaper for them. So there's different things like that that might be tested through the demonstration housing proposal. So the next stage is the collaboration hub. So what that will look at is there will be, I can't remember, I think it might be about 10,000 letters that'll be sent out across the Canberra community to say, inviting people to be part of the collaboration hub. It'll be something that I think it's about 5 Saturdays that they'll have to give up of their time, and then people can write back and say they would like to be part of that. And that will be, people will be selected, other people who express an interest in being involved, to make sure we've got a good representative group of the community. They will work with us to look at the recommendations that we might make for changes. So they'll go through the comments that we received in this first stage, and they'll also look at some of the proposals for the demonstration housing to see what we might test. The next stage is the government review of that work. So the recommendations made by the Collaboration Hub. We'll look at what's recommended and what changes we might make to the territory plan or anything else that we might have the capacity to change. I suppose we only have a limited influence on different things, so we can't control so the construction costs and things like that, but we can look at the planning rules and other things that the AST government can control. And then the next stage would be a territory plan variation if that's what's recommended by the hub. So the first stage is seeking the views of people about what they would like to live in and what would they like to see in their suburbs. So either people are wanting themselves in the next 10, 15, 20 years to move to something else, or what they would like to see in their suburb, bearing in mind the need to sort of find housing for the 6,000 people that come into the city every year. And also getting a better understanding of what kind of level of diversity of housing that the community would like to see. We've had 3,650 visits to our Your Say website. We've got some forum conversations on that webpage. We've talked to about 250 people in the kiosks, so actually that doesn't include the people we talked to today, so it was probably about another 50. And 430 survey responses. That was from a couple of days ago. So we've been getting a good response for this. I mean, it's a Canberra-wide topic. The other thing about going out to the different areas is that whether or not the recommendations that are made are tailored for different areas, for instance. So we don't have any preconceived ideas of how we might change it. It might be something that in Gungahlin the changes, if any, might be different to Tuggeranong, to Inner South and Inner North and to Western Creek, for instance. So that's part of the feedback that we'd like to get from people. So as I said, so go to the Your Say website, that has the discussion paper on there. It's got a little survey, it's got the discussion forum. You can write to the territory plan team email address and visit us. So next Wednesday from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. we'll be in the marketplace answering people's questions. So I'm happy to answer questions now.
Excellent. Are there any questions? So, questions?
Kevin.
I didn't.
So you're talking about like what you are doing, not too close to your face. That's perfect.
That's right. Yeah. Just there. People on Facebook, can you hear me? My question is about the selection of the people who are going to be in the groups. Why don't you use the jury system, the citizens' jury system? Get random people and select them at random, and then ask them to come along and pay them to actually be part of the whole thing, and then bring in the experts to talk about the whole thing.
It's very similar to a citizens' jury format.
Oh.
So it's very similar to a citizens' jury format in that way. So there will be the people will be paid to participate for their time that they're giving up. The main difference between citizen jury and the collaboration hub is that they would make recommendations to the government about what changes to make, and then the government will consider those, whereas a citizens jury makes the decision and then that's implemented. The only reason why doing that is because they're planning rules that can be quite specific or complex how the flow-on effect. I suppose we'll go with what I suppose we'll take on board the comments that the collaboration hub will have, but I suppose it might be if it wasn't sort of necessarily workable for how they particularly worded it, we might adjust that. So that's really the only difference between the citizens jury and that. Sorry.
No, my question really was, you don't want to get people self-selecting in these things. So you want to be able to get a random set of people, not people who have said we're willing to do this thing. Otherwise you get people like me.
Well, I suppose it depends on who gets sent the letter. And those who get sent the letter can then express an interest of being involved. So that's how they choose a citizens jury as well. So we don't just force people to be part of something if they don't want to. So it is somewhat random, but it's also then chosen, as I said, so it will make sure we have a range of ages and a range of so homeowners and renters and future homeowners and things like that to have a good cross section. So it is still sort of mostly random, but not completely random.
Yep.
You can throw it.
But, yep.
G'day, I'm Finn from Northside Community Service, and I'm just having a question, whether you can answer, Alex, is what representation you might have from organisations such as NGO that in particular deal with, I guess, the more at-risk population, such as, and even government organisations such as OneLink. I'm just wondering, is there proper representation there, and what the processes are in place?
Thank you. So I suppose the Housing Choices project is a piece of the puzzle. So it's an overarching kind of housing strategy, and part of that is some other work that the ACT government is doing on housing affordability, and that's looking at from homelessness to public housing to I suppose that gap between people who are not eligible for public housing but can't afford the market rent. So we're working closely with them because I suppose a lot of our comments that we're getting they cross over. So they're involved. So they just basically sit across the corridor to me. So we sort of work with them. Part of the demonstration housing process will be an expression of interest process. So we're expecting to get some of those parties to be involved to say what types of things they might like to deliver. We are working with various groups like that. I'm not sure specifically the groups you've mentioned, but yeah.
There's representation. And are organisations encouraged, or are they explicitly offered to be part of the process?
So repeat the question and talk back.
Give me the answer.
Oh, sorry. Are people specifically encouraged to be involved?
Organisation.
Or organisations?
Yeah, well, I guess, I was probably following on from that gentleman said, and sorry to be a pain, but a lot of these at-risk people probably won't be neither in, I guess, a state to necessarily have their opinion put across, so there'll probably be organisations advocating on their behalf. I'm just wondering what the process in terms of, you said they're encouraged to...
Yeah.
To be a part of it.
So for people...
I guess the question is, are community groups specifically being invited to respond on behalf of the communities they look after?
Yeah, what he said.
Yeah, so I suppose, so you mean as part of the collaboration hub or just generally part of the process? Because there's two parts. So the collaboration hub, they're meant to represent the broader community, not their own interests, but also part of the process we are talking with the groups. And I suppose the type of work you're talking about is probably more aligned with what the affordable housing team are doing. And I know that they've worked very closely with various groups. And yes, it is hard to get people who may be the ones needing that type of housing but aren't in a position to or may not want to talk to it. But I suppose the groups that represent them have been involved in the process for that side of things.
Yep. Go toss away.
Yeah, I think I might be one of the speakers tonight. I came in late. Gary Petherbridge it is, right? I'm president of an organisation called the Owners Corporation Network, and I suppose we're a group that actually represents, if you like, people who live in strata. Now, right now, I was at a meeting last night with Minister Gentleman, and I think the conclusion was that about 50% of the dwellings in the future are going to be some form of strata, whether that be duplexes or dual occupancies through to 28-storey towers like you've got out here already. So I suppose, and look, I've seen many people in this strata sector, for example, and they're not disadvantaged. I wouldn't say that, but nevertheless, they're not that willing to be articulate about what they want and what they've got and where they want to go. So I suppose I'm suggesting also that there might be some role for organisations representing groups of people that are interested. So I think I'm basically saying something similar to what these other gentlemen are saying, and I suppose what I'm talking about right now are the people who already live in all this stuff, right? They're already there, so they know what's good and what's bad about it. And they also probably know what's missing, because a lot of them start living in a unit title establishment and move back out to the suburbs, because they prefer to be out where they've got a bigger house and they can have their grandkids there and so on. So there's that in and out that goes on. So, I think we're building up quite a bit of experience, and I've been involved with this organisation now for 10 years. So I suppose, I saw 2 out of your 10 stakeholder groups there that were community people and whatever. We basically represent a large slab of those 2 groups: the architects, the builders, the developers, the lawyers. They really don't live in these things. They're there, and we suffer the consequences of what they do. And we usually employ the employment of a few lawyers possible when we find that there's a lot of defects in the buildings, and then someone has to do something about it, and so that keeps them occupied as well. So I suppose I'm just making that comment that the organisation might be able to contribute in some way, representing a larger group of people.
So we'd encourage, if you haven't seen the paper already, to have a look and to put in a submission. And I suppose that's the hard thing of any consultation, and you can't get everybody's voice because there's a lot of people who don't have time, don't have an interest in it. But housing does affect everybody, and this is what, and the housing, like the built form in the ACT does affect us all. So that's why we're trying to go out as broadly as we can, but so we can't force people. But the groups that represent others, we'd like to hear from them and what they've heard from people. Because one thing we've heard from some during the kiosks is things like they would like to have multi-unit development, but they don't like the idea of having a strata title. They would prefer to have a single dwelling, so they're just responsible for their own land and they don't have to worry about anybody else. Can that be delivered? They're asking us. That's the type of thing. But yeah, there will be a lot of the dwellings that will be strata titled.
By the way, I'm not promoting strata. Actually, I'm going to go here because it's a smaller throat.
Sorry.
Thank you. So
the presentation that you did, is it focusing on the public housing or just in
All housing, yeah.
for the older housing? So based on your presentation, from my understanding, you're proposing the smaller houses.
Well, that's what we're seeking input on.
Yeah. So, but what already we are seeing in Gungahlin and all the new suburbs already small, and I'm really worried after this one, probably, everything will be further reduced to a smaller size, and what's going to happen to the good old Australian backyard, like the one we got in the south side where people have plenty of room and stuff. So in a country like Australia, we have plenty of space, and, we should use that rather than, squishing everyone in one place. So.
Well, I suppose, as we said at the beginning, it's saying we have got limited greenfield land, so we can't keep spreading out. But it's also said that we've got, so the Gungahlin area does have a larger proportion of that medium density housing than other suburbs. So I suppose it's something that it may be that there's not much change for Gungahlin, if any, for instance, whereas it might be something in other areas where they have still got those sort of blocks. For instance, the RZ2 zone, which is the suburban core zone, which is generally located around local centres and group centres, to have that slightly increased density. You don't have that in Gungahlin. You go straight to sort of the medium density zone. Other parts of Canberra have that in between zone, and whether or not that's the one that we have a look at the provisions for, that's the type of thing we want to get feedback for. So
as long as we're not moving towards Sydney or Melbourne kind of style.
no.
Did you want to go ahead?
So my question is, the housing paper describes that any changes to RZ1 will probably be quite modest, and my concern is that solutioneering before you've even got the consultation results in terms of you're not allowing or foreseeing any huge changes to what forms the major proportion of the ACT?
I suppose that wording is probably more to not scare people off about what we're looking at. I suppose we really are. We really don't have any sort of preconceived ideas. As I said, my team are the ones who are sort of putting it together, and we know that there's different things that you can change in the planning policies that can make various differences in what type of housing you can deliver. But we haven't sort of made up our mind yet about what we might be. But I suppose for an instance, so we originally started the project looking at just the RZ2, 3 and 4 zones, and then we sort of looked at RZ5, but then the suburban area was starting to be discussed because there was a lot of articles in the paper and people talking on the radio about wanting dual occupancies, for instance, that you can unit title. You're allowed to have a dual occupancy in the RZ1 suburban zone currently if you've got a block over 800 square metres, but you can't unit title it. So most people don't because you can't get the money from the bank to be able to do it. So those sort of things were being put to us. So it's something that, do we look at it saying, well, to save sort of going to much higher density, do you say you allow dual occupancies across all of the suburban area? Or do you look at it saying only corner blocks, for instance, or blocks with certain features, so of a certain size? There's a lot of different things that we can do, but what we're first finding out is, well, what type of housing do people want to live in? Because there's not much point us changing the rules to allow a certain type of housing, and everyone goes, we don't actually want it. So, we're wanting to try and deliver what people want without sort of, I suppose, wasting time, everyone's time, and changing things that aren't really needed. If that answers the question.
All right. Got a question there? No. Someone new is going to get a question. You ready to catch?
I can try. Isn't too bad. Hi, my name is Beta. We talked about, or I should say, you talked about not having a lot of changes to Gungahlin, given, yes, Gungahlin already has a fair bit of medium density housing. I don't know whether, and I must say I haven't read the discussion paper, and I don't know if people have already raised some of the issues we're already facing with medium density housing in Gungahlin. One of the things that I can think of is parking and how it creates a real nuisance and annoyance to residences in and around this medium density housing that's being created? Are people really, or are builders or ACT really thinking about how you're actually going to manage the parking aspect, especially for the apartments? A lot of the apartments, and what I'm hearing is a lot of people sublet the houses, which means it could be a 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom apartment, but you probably have 2 or 3 families living in there, which means you will have more than one car. So if you have a single garage or double garage, you still have people having more than the number of cars than the number of garages. Consequently, you have the side streets or off streets and illegal parking everywhere. We are experiencing that. So as part of the consultation, yes, you want to include, the gentleman said, you want to include strata and people like that who live, which caters for the apartments, but you should also be talking to people who are living in the single dwellings or individual houses, and how does that impact with having apartments around them?
Especially where there is a mixed of like single dwelling and apartment side by side. We are facing this issue for the last like 2 years or so. And I've been contacting ACT Canberra Connect, and they practically told me they can do nothing because when their inspector come in, have a look, no cars were there which is illegally parked. Obviously they come during the office hours, and I'm talking about mostly from say 6:30 till like 8:30 or 9:30 in the morning.
Yeah, once you come back from work and you have to leave for work the next morning.
Especially the issue is when I try to come out of my garage, when there is both sides being blocked, it's like an accident bound to happen sometime.
So I guess this is one of the things that needs to be factored, so planned and designed a bit more properly so that it caters for everyone. Yes, not against apartments coming up. Yes, can understand, 6,000 people coming into ACT every year. Of course, you do want housing for them. I take note of the point of the Australian backyard, which we are losing. But again, I'm sure we don't have so much land that we can continue to have the larger houses that we have. Some of us are lucky to have. So yes, very open to have, whatever sort of apartment structure, housing structure that we have to manage our future, but it needs to all take into consideration some of the issues that people are already experiencing and how that might impact further.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, on your way to the answer, I think one of the opportunities here is this is really good feedback, and encourage people to provide feedback.
Yeah, and I suppose, as you said, sort of getting the feedback from people living in medium density housing and issues that they're facing is just as important feedback as people who are wanting to have a different type of housing, because if we don't learn for how it's working on the ground now, it makes it harder to have rules that work well into the future. So yeah, we'd encourage people to also raise issues like parking, and parking has been raised, particularly in the Gungahlin area and other areas where you've got that medium density housing. Because as you said, there are people who, it might say, well, you've got a 2-bedroom apartment and so you only need 1 car space. You might have 2 or 3 cars that the people who are living in that apartment may use. So some of that's also sort of behaviour changes over time of people sort of realising that maybe they don't need to have cars. But yeah, it is an issue that we need to be aware of. So it's other things like parking and things like open space provided on the block and things like that are things that people have raised that we'll be looking into. So yeah, it might be something that, if we look at increasing the density, the number of dwellings in the house, on the property, do we also strengthen other controls to sort of have that protection? Because I suppose we don't want to sort of have increased density and then ruin what the sort of the residential areas look like. So we want to have that balance.
All right, any more burning questions? Okay, all right, we'll give you one more point to add, Gary, only on the basis that you're now eating into your own time.
Just as an example, I mean, we lived for 40 years in a big house, garden, whatever. 13 years ago, we moved to an apartment. The transition's been fantastic. Not everyone that happens where that works, but basically we bought the argument from the government back 13 years ago that move out of the big house and the garden and leave it for a family. And we bought that argument and did so. Now what we're finding is that we're being punished by the government with higher rates. right? So we paid the big stamp duty as well, and we're getting paid we're now paying the higher rates as well. So that's just an example of one model, if you like, that people do change and move from place to place in a different circumstance. And I think we were doing the right thing by releasing some of those big blocks that you're talking about, that you can then have the family house. So, you know, I think a lot of older people like myself, I'm 75, we are prepared to move, but we don't expect to be punished for moving. Right, so I think that's a point, and certainly I'll raise some issues relative to rates when I talk.
All right. Well, I think it's a really interesting consultation. I think it's really challenging to bring all the. It's always challenging getting community engagement, and we'll encourage people to attend the session on Wednesday. Yep. Hopefully you've got a Facebook post or an event we can reshare or something.
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
I think the EPSDD website has the Facebook page is promoting
ESPDD.
EPSDD.
I'll go and hunt them down.
Yeah, otherwise, you'll say we'll have the links to all those things.
Terrific. Right, thank you very much, Alex. Our next speaker is Gary Petherbridge, who's cleverly done an auto-introduction for himself. So I'll let him make a few points around the role of strata and the concerns of the owners' co-owners corporation network.
Okay. I mean, strata, as I probably already said, stretches from duplexes right through to the 28-storey places that you've got down the road here. So and everything in between. And a minister gentleman last night at a meeting that I was at was quite specific that 50% of the dwellings in Canberra in the future are going to be like that, and 50% might be in infill areas. Now, a high percentage of the infill areas will be strata of some form, whether it be two places on a block or whatever that have got separate titles. Now, I think the idea of moving away from the big greenfield areas is something that has to happen. So I'm not against any of this, but and also you're going to see that some of the strata will occur in the new areas as well, because let's face it, there's the Molonglo Valley and parts of the area here. They're already building strata there in new sites. So all along Flemington Road, what have you got? You've got strings and strings of strata. So it's happening in front of our eyes. Now, I mean, I can make comments about rates and how that, and I think I've already made my point about the rates when I was sitting down there, that moving towards strata was something that the government was encouraging people to do. And we bought the argument. Personally, I bought the argument 13 years ago, but I see a lot of others that have bought it as well, because certainly the expansion of strata and people into apartments and townhouses and things has happened significantly over that last 10, 12, 13 years. So people have bought the argument and moved on. And in the process, I said they released some of the big houses with the suburban blocks, so the families with 3 or 4 kids can move into those and have that. But not everyone wants that either. So I think the housing choices thing, I commend it. I think it's a great idea, and certainly the ACM will be putting in a submission and maybe as part of representation of a broader group, maybe we might like to participate in the collaboration stuff as well. But some other aspects to do with strata that I just want to briefly mention. One of the things that's been really bad in Canberra relative to strata.
I'm going to ask a question which I didn't know the answer to.
Yeah, sure.
In case others don't know the answer to
Good,
it. Does everyone know what strata is? Everyone's nodding?
Yeah, not sure. All right.
One paragraph something.
Strata is where you've got a group of dwellings, all sharing some common property. Right, so it could be a duplex or a dual occupancy where you've got two houses together. They have a small amount of common property. It might simply be to service the water meter, but they're strata. And then there's the 28-storey places that you see down the road here. They're strata as well, because they're sharing a lot of common property, like the corridors and everything else, and the lifts and everything else. So that basically is what strata is, and it usually has an owner. Well, always has an owners' corporation, and the owners' corporation is there they're the owners of the whole complex, if you like, right? And they own it in shares. So that someone might, if the places are exactly the same, well, they'll have the same size of share. But if one has got a great view and huge, well, it might have a higher entitlement in terms of voting rights than someone who's got a small place at a lower level, and so on. So that's the sort of element. Does that help a little bit? Okay. So I suppose in the process of building a lot of this unit title stuff over the last few years, the government hasn't always been that good at enforcing the developers to build quality. The building quality has been pretty awful. There's 85% of the properties in Canberra and New South Wales have got serious defects. Now, that means that there's a problem for people who buy into them. Somehow they've got to get those defects fixed. They might be defects in their own unit, or they might be defects in the common property. If they're in the common property, the owners' corporation has to do it, but you're part of the owners' corporation, so you have to pay for it. Or you get the builder to do it because he didn't do it properly. But significantly, a number of builders go bust and disappear and don't want to know about it. So there's a real problem there in terms of that building quality thing. So I'm not advocating that everyone jump and go into strata, because I can see a hell of a lot of problems there. So, but nevertheless, that's what's going to happen. And I think the housing choices is going to deliver more of strata than maybe the big suburban house. Well, that's just a fact. I think that's what will happen. But nevertheless, that's up to government and the people who do the work on this. So then some other things that the OCN does, where we're trying to provide training to people who are in owners' corporations to understand what they've got to do when they're in an owners' corporation, what their role is and so on. So we do that. We're trying to work with the government to provide guides about what you need to do if you're thinking about moving into some sort of strata, just so that you go in there with some expectation of what's likely to be the operational model. We're also looking at legislative reform with parts of the government to I suppose, improve the legislation to a point where things can operate better. Because a lot of the cases that finish up in what's referred to as ACAT, which is the ACT Civil and Administrative Tribunal, a lot of the things that turn up in ACAT are disputes because people didn't understand what the legislation was meant to be, which signifies to me that the legislation needs some improvement. That's pretty normal because no one can ever write legislation in the first place that does everything. So, you know, they're living things. So that's important. But one specific piece of legislation that's totally missing is to do with mixed use. Now, this means when restaurants and bars and hotels and whatever are sharing the same common property and same area as a group of residents, permanent residents. Now, there's been examples that I've seen where the lifts, for example, in some of these places, I'm thinking specifically of the Kingston foreshores, but I'm sure it could happen anywhere. The lifts are provided for the hotel, part of it, and the beer kegs are carried in the lift. The rotten prawns are carried in the lift. They spill out all over the place. The residents come along with their suitcase or whatever they've got to go home, and they're stepping through rotten prawns, and they've also got to pay for the fixing of the lifts. There is no legislation yet in the ACT to cater for that mixed-use environment. It needs to happen. So we're working with the government trying to get that to happen. We also look at management. There are about 15 organisations that provide strata management or help manage the operation of a body corporate or a strata environment. There's 15 of those. Some of them are good, some of them not so good. They're all gradually improving. We're working with them to try and improve what they do to get them to be a little bit more customer focused, because we represent the people who live in strata and they're their customers. So that's something else that we do. Now, I've already said something about rates, so I'm not going to dwell on it, but certainly the rating system that's just been put in place as of 2017-18 budget has significantly increased the rates on people who own lots in a strata development. In some instances, one-bedroom apartments and two-bedroom apartments have increased. Their rates have increased by as much as 100% in 1 year. Now, some people have bought into these places thinking, oh, they've bought into something affordable. Well, they might have been affordable to buy, but it's not affordable to keep because they've now got these huge rates that they didn't expect. And not only that, with the building defect thing that I described before, they're sometimes going to pay a levy to get the building fixed. So there's that cost as well. So there's a few things to be aware of there in the whole pricing structure to do with strata. Anyway, I think that's pretty well it. But if you've got some questions for me, I'm happy to answer anything. Okay.
Thank you very much, Gary.
Good.
So it forced me to have a look at strata and learn a lot more about it. So things like body culprits and all of that are part of the strata piece. Anybody got any questions for Gary around strata and title and issues? Andrew, Henley?
Have you got a website where if people want to go and have a look about the rate increase and stuff, how that's going to look for the next 5 years and stuff? Have you done any calculation kind of thing?
Calculations on?
Yeah. How there's, the way the rate increase.
Yeah, I've done some of that.
Okay, so that's all on your website, is it?
No, that's not on the website because tomorrow,
Yeah.
at 10 o'clock, there'll be a petition. Tomorrow at 10 o'clock, the first item on the Legislative Assembly agenda is the delivery of a petition from 5,500 concerned people to complain about the increases in the rates that I referred to. So now, as a result of that, I'm sure we'll be updating a lot of things to do with figures and stuff like that. But I do have a lot of figures, and I mentioned briefly the sort of thing that's happened with one bed and 2 bedroom apartments in terms of the escalation of costs. But
That's your website?
No, it's not. No, it is, but you want the ACT one. So WEB, OCN, ACT. We are affiliated with the New South Wales one. That's what it is. .org.au, yeah.
Share it from Facebook.
WEB, not www, WEB, ocnact.org.au. Yep, that's it. Okay. All right, so that's all there.
Question from Andrew, stand by.
My question just relates in terms of the recalculation of rates and how that's done. In terms of, I understand in terms of like, let's say a 2-bedroom apartment in Kingston worth $1 million, how much should they pay compared to my 4-bedroom house in Gungahlin?
There are already 2-bedroom apartments in Kingston worth $1 million.
It was a pluck.
2-bedroom apartments all over Canberra too, so I wouldn't focus on necessarily one point of view. All over. In terms of the way the calculation has been changed, do you work for the government, by the way? No. The way the calculations have changed means that basically 95% of people, maybe it's a bit less, a bit more, 95% of owners of strata units or lots are now excluded from using the tiered rating factors, because what they do now, what the government has done is they've taken the value of the whole property and rated that. So, for example, some of your places along Flemington Road might be worth $3 million or something as a total. So they rate then that $3 million, and they then divide the $3 million, the rates calculated on $3 million amongst a number of properties, if there's 4 or 5 or 6, whatever number there is, right? So they divide the rates up amongst them. Now, what that does is it excludes the people that have got those lots from the 4 tiers or factors that are used initially. Because your rates are calculated at 0.2 something for the first 150,000, 0.3 something for the next 150,000, and so on up to 600,000, and then they have the very highest rate. So basically, all of the strata type places, because they've got the total lot is being used for the calculation, you don't get hardly any use in strata of those first 3 tiers. So from a fairness point of view, a normal house block gets to use those tiers. A strata unit rarely does, even if it's only a one-beddy.
So a one-bedroom apartment could be paying the same rate as a three-bedroom apartment in the same block. Is that what you're saying?
No, they'd be paying their share of a much higher total rate, because their share might only be 24 units as an entitlement, if you like, whereas a three-beddy might be 70 or 80 units. So the three-beddy might pay 3 times as much, but the problem is that the one-beddies are still stuck with the overall value of the property, so they don't get to get an advantage of the lower tiers. Okay?
Right. Thanks very much, Gary.
Okay.
Useful input, and I feel further enlightened.
I do have some newsletters if you want to give them around to people.
Sure.
Just so
Sure.
people
Wait a second.
have some idea.
Don't go away.
I've just got a question coming in from online. I wonder what percentage of current strata owners are investment properties. Is over-investment driving up rates?
Usually about 60% of a lot of strata properties are often rental, right? Now, I mean, that raises another point, and that is that the cost of the rental, with this increase in the rates, it's not only rates, but it's the land tax as well. So the two things together are adding significant extra cost to someone who's got an investment property. And what we're hearing is people are going to move out of those investment properties. They're going to give up on providing rental accommodation in Canberra, which is going to put extra pressure on the amount of rental accommodation. And I'm already hearing, for example, university accommodation is going to struggle because a lot of the people who have been consciously trying to provide cheaper university-type accommodation, they're going to move out of the market because the university students can't afford the extra $50 a week that needs to be added because of the increase in the government costs. And in fact, I had a suggestion from someone today in the property sector that maybe what needs to happen is real estate agents need to start to advertise that, a bit like the airlines, where you say, well, your fare is, your rent is, and plus you've got to pay this government charge and this government charge and this government charge, so your total rent will be this. A bit like the airlines.
Sounds like a nightmare, almost scary. All right, well, thank you very much, Gary. I think a useful perspective on a whole bunch of topics. Scatter them as you go. I'll definitely take one, but scatter them as you go.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Do you mind if I leave? Because my wife's had an accident.
Oh, no. You're free to leave. Just careful you don't trip over the cable. Thank you. Our third discussion today is from the ACT Climate Change Group. They're talking about the progress they've made on the ACT government's climate change strategy. Notice that Suzanne Orr's here. Thank you for joining us, MLA. We have had apologies from both Megan Fitzharris and James Milligan, who've indicated they can't make it tonight. So thank you for recognising that. But I'll now cast over to Catherine and Joel to take us through. So.
Great. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming tonight and giving us the opportunity to talk to you. My name is Joel Hankinson. I'm a member of the climate change team in the ACT government, and Catherine is one of my colleagues in the team as well. And tonight we'd like to talk to you about the new ACT climate strategy discussion paper that was released late last year, and will inform the development of our future strategy, how we deal with emissions from 2020 onwards. So in terms of what I'm going to run through tonight, first of all, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what's been done to date, where emission reductions are being achieved, and why we need to have a new strategy. From there, I'm going to delve straight into what the discussion paper is talking about, what it says about when we need to aim to have net zero emissions, what areas we need to focus on in order to achieve emissions reductions, the challenges and opportunities that exist in those respective areas, and the ideas for action in those areas that we would like you in the community to talk to us about in terms of what you think we could do. As a proviso before I start, something important to keep in mind is that this is just a discussion paper. It doesn't set out what the ACT government's current policy is. What we're really after is getting your ideas. So what this really is a call for community engagement, for your ideas. At the end of the presentation, I'll highlight how you can do that, and of course in Q&A, also happy to take any questions that you may have. So let's jump straight into what's been happening so far. We know that climate change is happening. 2016 was the hottest year on record, the ACT had its hottest summer on record, and 2017 was the third hottest year on record. So we know it's happening and we need to respond to it. The ACT, to its credit, has always been very proactive in tackling climate change. We have a very interested community that's very well engaged and is very interested in tackling climate change, which is fantastic. The ACT government has also been very proactive in terms of setting emissions reduction targets. Specifically, our targets right now are to achieve net zero emissions by 2050 and to reduce our emissions by 40% based on our 1990 levels, so what our emissions were in 1990, by 2020. What we've been doing so far has been focused on achieving that 40% reduction by 2020, and that's been informed by our second climate change strategy action plan, AP2, which came out in 2012. Also last year, our adaptation strategy paper came out, and Catherine was a real champion in terms of putting that together and implementing it. Over half the actions have been completed now, and the completion is still ongoing as well. So let's talk about what's happening so far under AP2. In many respects, the focus of emissions reductions to date has really focused on the low-hanging fruit of where we can achieve emissions reductions. And that has involved focusing on achieving 100% renewable electricity by 2020. So what this slide does is show you a breakdown of our respective wind and solar farms, where all of our power will come from in terms of renewable electricity to 2020. And we are on target to achieve those 2020 40% reduction target. It's been something that has been achievable because the technology has been available. It's been possible for us to enter into contracts with different wind and solar farms in order to generate that renewable electricity. And we've also been able to complement that by focusing on achieving energy efficiencies in the community. So helping households adopt energy efficient upgrades such as LED lighting, and also working with the business community in terms of how they can take steps to manage their energy efficiencies as well. Of course, having achieved this low-hanging fruit, we now need a new strategy that's going to take us from 2020 onwards towards being a net zero emissions territory. And having picked that low-hanging fruit, now we have to identify new challenges, areas that we need to focus on which will be harder for us to achieve reductions, areas that may require a certain amount of regulation or investment, and indeed a lot of behavioural change from us as territory residents at the same time. Again, coming to the discussion paper, which I will now lay out, is what's in it. It was informed by advice that we received from our ACT Climate Change Council. Again, it doesn't set out any specific policy that we're planning to implement, just the ideas that we've received that we may want to consider going forward. And again, we're really keen to get your ideas as members of the community of what we can do in those particular areas. Sure. So let's jump straight into what the discussion paper is proposing or suggesting we consider as a territory in order to move forward towards a net zero emissions territory. First and foremost, it proposes pushing forward when we achieve net zero emissions. So our target currently is 2050, and it proposes pulling it forward to 2045 or earlier. That's informed by developments in the climate science, a better understanding that we need to take action sooner and we need to take more action to reduce the impacts of climate change. And to make sure that we maintain a trajectory towards achieving that, the paper also suggests that we implement interim targets going forward. So this slide highlights what those interim targets may be based on the Climate Change Council's advice. There's a 2025 target, a 2030 target, and a 2040 target. Each one would be complemented by its own specific climate change strategy to achieve that next target. And to my mind, there's a lot of advantages of this kind of approach, right? So there's opportunities for flexibility there. We can look at developments in technology over time, new innovations that come up, areas where our emissions reductions are working well, areas that we may need to change going forward in the future. Secondly, the discussion paper talks about what areas we need to focus on as a territory to reduce our emissions. So what this slide does is show you a comparison of our emissions right now towards our emissions and what they'll look like in 2020. So what our new climate strategy needs to use as its base for what we're going to achieve in the future. A couple of things immediately jump out from these slides. First of all, the second pie for 2020 is much smaller than the 2016-17 pie, and that is because of our transition to renewable electricity. The second thing is that the profile will change significantly. Without renewable electricity, 61% of our emissions will be coming from the transport sector, 22% from energy, which will largely comprise natural gas, for example, used in heating our homes and cooking, 10% from industry, 7% from our waste, and a very small chunk, less than 1%, coming from our land use. And so there's a number of challenges that we need to focus on going forward, looking at this emissions profile. We need to tackle transport emissions, we need to tackle the emissions that are coming from our natural gas, but we also need to continue managing our renewable electricity supply and demand. We need to make sure that we continue to have enough renewable electricity to power the territory, and we don't need to consider transitioning to dirtier forms of power. So what I'd like to do now is just go through some of those particular chunks of that little pie to talk about some of the challenges that have been identified for us by the Climate Change Council and some of the ideas that are being presented for you to consider and again come back to us on for community feedback. So first of all, electricity demand management. So electricity demand management is really going to have two challenges for us. We need to make sure that we continue to have sufficient renewable electricity, again, so we don't need to consider dirtier forms of power. And we also need to ensure that we're using that energy efficiently. In terms of using that energy efficiently, we're already doing quite a lot in that space. So the Energy Efficiency Improvement Scheme has been working with a lot of households to encourage things like LED lighting or efficiency upgrades, but we will need to do more of that going forward. There's also great potential to achieve building upgrades in our community. So having designs that mean that we don't need to use energy so much to use heating or cooling, passive designs that work with the environment we live in to ensure that we don't really need to rely on our energy to work with the environment. Finally, there's an opportunity to increase the amount of energy that we can actually pool upon. One interesting area where the ACT government's working on this at the moment and where South Australia has really taken an interesting lead on is battery storage. So putting batteries into home where solar can be stored. They can rely and pull down on that solar energy, particularly during peak periods, and help manage electricity and electricity demand through the broader grid. Currently, that's been extended to 5,000 Canberra homes. The second pie of energy was, of course, natural gas. So we need to do a lot of work to try and transition ourselves off natural gas. Pursuing options like electrifying our cooking and heating in our home, also considering possible gas alternatives that can be pushed into our system that has lower rates of emissions from what is currently being used, so for example hydrogen. And one fact which comes out of the climate discussion paper, which I find quite interesting, is that there is scope for hydrogen, for example, to be pushed into the grid or our gas grid to achieve a level of lower emissions without having to make any significant changes to our appliances. But of course, although it's lower emitting, it's still emitting, so trying to achieve electrification is a great way going forward if we want to be a net zero emissions territory. And again, we want your thoughts on if these sound like good ideas to you. Transport. So as I mentioned, transport constitutes 61% of that emissions profile that we see in 2020, and the way we can articulate the challenge with transport is deceptively simple. We just need to get people out of high emissions transport and into low emissions transport. So what this graph does is show how much emissions are released per average trip in Canberra as of 2020 as a result of certain different kinds of transport. So as you see, large cars by far and away are the highest emitting form of transport that we have, followed by small cars, followed by motorcycles. We get to our bus fleet. And then we start getting into those kinds of things where there are no emissions. So active travel, walking to work, walking to the shops, cycling to work, catching the light rail when it's established, catching emissions-free public transport. Currently we are piloting an electricity bus in our bus fleet, and also electric cars, which I'll turn to in a second and provide a bit more guidance around. So let's talk more about the challenges about transport to give you a sense of the kind of issues that we want you to think about. So as we move to a more compact and livable city over time, there's a real opportunity for us to leverage active forms of travel to and from work, to and from the shops, to limit the emissions that we are currently emitting in the ACT. There's a chance for us to cycle around the city, to work, to the shops, opportunity for us to walk. A real challenge that we will have to face, particularly as a government, is to encourage behaviour change in this area. We need people to want to walk to work, to want to cycle to work, and it's really an initiative that the whole of the ACT needs to work on if that's going to be something that we achieve in the future. Public transport. So as I mentioned, we already are piloting an electric bus in our bus fleet. The light rail is coming in, which will be electrified. So steps are already being taken to reduce emissions from that area. But again, we need to make sure and encourage public transport as a way that you can get around the city efficiently. And that's going to be part of the challenge going forward as well. And finally, electric vehicles. So we know the electric vehicle revolution is coming. We know electric vehicles are going to reduce in price, that they're going to be a much more viable alternative for people to purchase in the future. And there is going to be a real challenge to ensure that it is a viable alternative. Some of the ideas that have been suggested in the paper by the Climate Change Council for your consideration and ours are things like having sufficient charging stations around the city to make it a more interesting or possible alternative to transport. And I encourage you to have a look at that in the paper and provide some feedback on whatever thoughts you may have. Turning to waste. So as I mentioned, waste will constitute about 7% of that emissions profile, but it will continue to grow if we don't consider how we can reduce our emissions from it. As a starting point, I'd like to turn to the waste feasibility study. So the waste feasibility study will be coming sooner rather than later. If you have any specific questions around waste, a colleague of ours in waste has suggested that he'd be happy for me to collect any questions you have, feed it through to him. We can feed it back through your community council so you can get the answers on that you would like. But to talk more generally about the challenges that we face from a climate change perspective, at a general level, we need to stop thinking about waste simply as waste, but also thinking about it as a resource. Something that we can use in, for example, composting with food and garden organics to generate energy. To the extent that we can't grab our waste and convert it into something we can use, we need to think of ways that we can reduce emissions. We don't want to just throw it into landfill. We want to think of alternative options that we can use to reduce those emissions. One that's been put up here and is mentioned in the discussion paper is anaerobic digestion. But as the waste feasibility study comes out, it'll be very interesting to see what that says and what kind of suggestions we can look at going forward as well. So I'd like to turn to land use now, and I'm just going to jump ahead a couple of slides and then I'll come back to this one. So as I mentioned, emissions from land use are very low in the ACT. It's less than 1% of our profile. But where land use really has benefits for us is its role that it can play in holding carbon for us, in taking carbon out of the atmosphere, sequestering, reducing overall emissions and helping us achieve net zero emissions. As we move to a more compact and urban city, there are opportunities for us to pursue afforestation, reforestation projects on the outskirts of the city centre. As also at the same time as we are becoming that more urban compact city, there's also going to be a real need for us to look at living infrastructure in those areas, which can act as a source, a sink of carbon, but also has certain adaptation co-benefits, which I'm going to now turn to. If you have any questions about living infrastructure, Catherine's been working on that quite a lot, so I'm sure she'll be happy to help out with any questions there as well. So turning to this idea of living infrastructure and us moving to a more urban city, I'm just going to pick this up and move to the graph so I can point to it a bit. As we move to a compact city, we're going to have a lot more concrete, a lot more urban development building up, and as a result we're going to be trapping a lot more heat in our city centres, and that's going to have a negative effect on the livability of the city. This is a really fantastic picture from 2015 in Tuggeranong. It shows you how different surfaces absorb heat, what impact that has on the temperature around you. So as you can see, underneath trees, so we have nice shade. Temperature is significantly lower. It's between the 27.5 and 32.5 degree area. You start looking at pavement, the side pavement and the road, much higher. What we need to do is encourage living infrastructure in our cities and our urban areas to capture these benefits. There are many different ways that living infrastructure can be implemented. This is a fantastic diagram which shows you a number of different types of living infrastructure and the key roles they can play. So as a bit of a taster, we need large trees to provide us with shade to achieve exactly what that picture shows you, which is reduced heat. We need parks for people to go to, which can be cooler areas so they can escape the heat when we do have extreme heat events. We can consider things like plants on buildings to promote insulation, to act as a carbon store as well. And all of this also has some significant co-benefits as well. There's been studies that show that interacting with nature can have strong mental health benefits. It can also have positive impacts on, for example, property values. The discussion paper includes a slide, which includes a page, which asks you to tell us what you think about living infrastructure, what type of living infrastructure you value, what you think may work and may not, and we'd love to hear your thoughts about that. So jumping to community engagement. So as I mentioned, this discussion paper came out in December of last year, so we're currently going through the community consultation process. Again, it only sets out ideas, and really what we want to do now is to know what you guys think about them. A lot of these ideas are going to require behaviour change, and we want to know what you think are things that can actually be achieved by Territory residents and things that you want to see in your city. There are a number of ways you can get in contact with us. So currently on our Your Say website, you can find our discussion paper. You can find some surveys that you can go and have a look at, answer a few questions about climate change to provide some feedback for us. And Catherine's holding up the discussion paper so you can see what it looks like. We're also running a forum which has a number of questions on there just asking about what ideas you may have as well, so please do have a look at that. We also run an email address, so climatechange@act.gov.au, and we've received a lot of submissions there already, but we would always be very happy to receive more, and I look at it every day and I love reading submissions, so please throw some more in. And more generally, if you're not interested in interacting with us online, you can also interact with us in person. So the Multicultural Festival is coming up and we'll have a presence there every day where you can come and have a chat to us in person if you'd like to. We'll also have a presence at the Canberra show coming up as well. So again, we'll be there every day, so please do come along if you do want to have a proper chat. So I'll just cover one more point before I finish. So the deadline for submissions is the 9th of April, so there is a little bit of time left, so please do go away and have a look at the discussion paper and have a good think about what you may want to share with us and any ideas you have. There's plenty of time, so don't feel rushed based on this presentation. And thanks very much, and happy to take any questions.
Thanks. Thanks, Joel. Any questions?
Postcards that I distributed. One is for a longitudinal survey that we're doing to capture people's views and people's understanding of climate change and how they live. It's establishing the baseline for sustainability and resilience to climate change. So the first time we're doing this, it's a very long survey, but there's prizes you can win if you go through to the end. And the other one is a postcard which basically is opportunities to send us your photos and win some prizes about your views of the future with the climate change. So yeah, 2 opportunities to make some pocket money and have fun at the same time.
Cool. Thank you. Yep, there we go.
Thank you very much. I'm just trying to understand the climate change stuff because when I was growing up, they've been calling it global warming, but that didn't work. So they changed the name to climate change. I'm not sure why they changed the name, and even the John Coleman, the Weather Channel founder, he said climate change is a scam, and he couldn't find any evidence of polar ice increasing or heat waves. Everything looks to be stable, and even the ozone layer, it's getting healed, and it'll be healed by 2050. And if you look at the Victoria and South Australia, because of the renewable energy target they achieved, they had the worst summer ever because there's no power, it's blackout. So, and I'm a bit scared because are we going to the kind of third world kind of thing where we will be because I'm not sure whether you've done enough research saying okay we can support this or any kind of subsidies. Otherwise we will end up paying more on electricity just like the Victoria and South Australia. So.
Well, thanks very much for your question. There's a few aspects to that, so let me try and break it down just a little bit. So I'll start with your last point, which is about renewable electricity. You're right that predictions are that renewable electricity's costs will go up, but they're also forecast to go down in the longer term. So the affordability will improve. It's not expected to be a case of constantly increasing costs. So that hopefully covers off that point. In terms of your point about whether we look at this as a problem of global warming or climate change, how it's been portrayed and how it's been pursued as a policy idea. Personally, I've always known it as climate change, to be honest, so I'm afraid I can't talk too much about why that distinction may have arisen over time. In my view, there seems to be a lot of scientific evidence that proves that climate change isn't a scam. There was an interesting article last week speaking specifically about the ozone layer, talking about how ozone traditionally is quite high in the atmosphere, but it's also coming down closer to the surface of the Earth, and that has follow-on negative effects for us as well. Unfortunately, I can't remember the name of that article. I'll be happy to try and find it for you and push it through your community council for you to have a read of. But in my view, climate change is a real issue. We're seeing trends that are encouraging it. In terms of the concern in general about costs increasing over time, something that's really interesting, and electric vehicles is a really fantastic example of this. It's not necessarily the case that all possible investments are going to be more costly in terms of, let me rephrase that. It's not necessarily the case that environmentally friendly options are going to be more expensive. Over time, we know that the costs of electric vehicles are going to come down. They're going to reach a par with petrol cars. You're not going to have to buy petrol for your car, and you're going to save money on that. So I don't think we should always look at the idea of climate change as only a cost. It's also an opportunity to change how we live our lives, how we want our city to work, what kinds of things we want to see, such as electric cars. And there are many ways where that will also encourage savings. One aspect that I also just want to cover off, and I might leave it at this point, is that the ACT government is also doing a lot to try and promote energy efficiencies in households to try and keep down costs as they are currently arising. So the Energy Efficiency Improvement Scheme is doing a lot of work around things such as LED lighting, encouraging upgrades to household appliances. They do work with low-income households to particularly assist with them. So there are programs in place and policies that are being implemented to help manage those costs as well. And I hope that provides an answer to your question.
Also cover the South Australia and, the South Australia and Victoria had a worse summer because of the blackouts, because of the renewable energy. So.
Sure. Without trying to sound facetious, I think the benefit is that we weren't the first to suffer a period like that, and now we can learn from the mistakes or the challenges that those territories or those states had. We've seen what the problem is, and now we're in a position where we can start to develop policy to try and ensure that we don't face a situation like that in the future. Unfortunately, I can't give you too much more of a substantive answer than that, but it is something that we are now aware of as a result of those examples, and now we can try and put ourselves in a position to ensure it doesn't happen to us going forward. So thank you for the question.
All right, and we're just getting a bit tight for time, but I can see two hands up. So, we'll out the back line.
Hi, I was really interested in what you were saying about transport. Oh, sure. Come forward. I was really interested in what you were saying about transport changes over the years. From two perspectives, I'm a resident in Casey, and that's actually been built really well for pedestrian access, but I think it's had some unintended consequences, particularly around litter. There's a lot of litter, no bins, and because people can walk to the shops so easily, that problem just is not resolving. So I'm wondering, are you going to look at sort of, consequences that you might be called unintended? And secondly, around buses, I know that Action is going through a process at the moment to redevelop the networks. Are you liaising with them? Oh, sorry.
So I'll address your second comment first, and then I'll come back to the unintended consequences question. So I can't speak specifically to what we are doing to work with them in terms of the bus network. I unfortunately haven't been involved in that, and so unfortunately I can't provide too much guidance on that. What I can say is that we are in constant conversation across the different directorates. So we do talk a lot to Transport in general about strategic planning and the challenges that are going to come up. So we are conscious that those problems, we're conscious of the need for us to work with them, and we are doing so. In terms of unintended consequences around, for example, litter, that's a really important point, and it would be fantastic if people like yourself could raise that, for example, in our consultation process, because these are the kinds of things that we need to see the community, that we need to know that the community is suffering from, and things that we need to also take into account as we strategise going forward. We'll take it on notice, because Catherine's making sure that we capture the questions you have now, but it's certainly something we'll keep in mind. So thank you.
A couple of quick ones. They need to be very quick.
Following on from the unintended consequences as well, I think that what I'm interested in hearing from is what is the plan for, you talked about batteries as part of the solar PV solutions and also electric vehicles. When they go end of life, what is the disposal method and recycling options available for those batteries? Because whilst we're fixing an environmental issue here, we are actually causing another one down the track that I don't think we actually have a solution for.
Excellent point, and again, it's something that we need to consider and think through. So thank you for raising it. It's the kind of thing that we will need to take on board as we're strategising into the future, but it is something that we'll consider. Fortunately, can't speak too much to what we are doing at the moment, but hopefully, it's something that we can now take into account going forward. So thank you.
I'll ask Andrew a quick question.
My question just relates to, we've picked off the low-hanging fruit. The stuff that to come is harder, involving behavioural change, which requires a degree of political courage. So hence, what we really need to get on board is having the Transport Minister and the Planning Minister really on board and supporting this shift, because it is going to be quite difficult.
Well, thank you for that comment. As I mentioned, we are working with Transport to try and strategically plan for the future. We have a minister who cares greatly about climate change, Minister Rattenbury, and we'll take your comment on board. It is important that we achieve those kinds of co-relationships. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Joel. Great piece of work. Just reminds me, it's hard work being a resident in Canberra with so many consultations to contribute to. So, all right, thanks very much, Joel. Our last speaker this evening is Suzanne Orr, MLA, who's been doing some work on different ways of engaging with the community. Ask Suzanne to come up, talk to us about them. Do you have slides? Okay.
So I've taken a moment to look into this. Yep, okay. That's the one. Yep, we'll go with that one choice. All right. Thank you. I was actually, I've been doing some work on build quality as well, and that a part of the reason of me coming was a discussion I was having with the Gungahlin Community Council about what they were doing and what I was doing. So I've come tonight to present on what I've been finding on the build quality in Canberra, but I'm happy to talk a little bit more about the ways we've been engaging with the community to answer some of these questions. But just bear with me, because it might not be exactly where we were thinking. So just to give you the background, the quality of buildings in Gungahlin, this is something I've had quite a few residents approach me on with issues that they're having. And the issues range from things that are occurring to just navigating their way through the system to make sure that they can get the best recourse to those things and so forth. Peter, can I just can I use this to...
Yeah, the arrows go left and right.
Okay, so this is important. So people have come to me asking these questions. Some of the issues that have been raised, in particular waterproofing, seems to be quite a big issue across all of Gungahlin. So talking to people about what they can do to get that improved. Light examples I've had given to me, light fittings that leak when it rains, mould as a result of the area not being waterproofed properly, concrete cancer, particularly in basement car parks where leaks are getting in, windows, doors and fly screens that are incorrectly fitted, fireproofing we've had a little bit of, not a huge amount though, and like I said, the processes for rectifying these defects. So what we did, because we were getting quite a few comments coming into the office about these, I actually said, well, let's actually go out and find out, are these isolated events, or is this something that is a little bit wider across the electorate and something that we should be channeling our focus to appropriate to the issue. So what we've done during last year is my office and I, we've gone out, we've done a survey online, we've letterboxed for that around various parts of Gungahlin, asking people to fill out the survey, let us know if they've had any issues. We've gone out door knocking, and we've, in particular when we were door knocking, we've picked different types of housing. So we've done multi-unit housing, we've done detached and semi-detached as well, just to get a range, and that's actually important. I'll come back when I'm talking about what I'm finding as to why that's worked out important. We've also just had general word of mouth. I put an article up in the Riot Act, which also drove some people to give us comments, and it's coming back to those main issues, waterproofing and how you get recourse through the system. So I clicked ahead of myself there. And the street stall, so down in the town centre. So what we're doing with all this information is, like I said, I wanted to go out to people and actually get a feel for how big the issue is. What the feedback we've gotten, and certainly if your own experience is different, please feel free. We've got a comment section coming up, so feel free to tell me that. But what we're finding is a lot of the issues seem to be focused on multi-unit dwellings. Detached and semi-detached dwellings don't seem to have the same level of issues coming out of their building structure. A lot of that can be attributed to the fact that multi-unit buildings are actually a much more complex build, and they're quite different to what we've done before. So that seems to be where quite a bit of it's going, but we're still exploring the ways why. So it is very much a question now of, well, what do we actually do next? And that's the part I'm looking at, is it a case of legislative change and me as a member putting forward ideas that could go to that? Would it be better to look at, say, the committee structure and doing inquiries? Is it a case of continuing to gather more information because we don't have a clear assessment of the picture? But that's the part that we're up to at the moment. So I guess what I wanted to hear from the room was if you had any opinions on the subject or personal experience that you'd like to potentially share, or just questions in general.
You mean in regards to the builders?
Yeah, building quality.
Okay,
yeah.
so you can either bid throw or right bid throw.
Oh, okay, gosh. This could really...
So
I might hand over to you to throw, because I don't want to show myself.
So, quick question.
So the thing what I can see in ACD, because the builders take the full control, because most of the lands are owned by them. So starting from that, they take the control, and at the completion of the project, so once they get the final payment, they're done and gone. So they got the 90 days to fix it. But I know personally, like, we've been chasing for 1 year to get the builder to fix it, and not just me. I've spoken to a few of my friends, they're all in the same boat, getting the builder to fix it. And if you go to the ACD government, like, the process is kind of painful, and there's a wait and stuff. So probably there should be an easy way to track all those builders, and they shouldn't be able to start any new project unless the clients sign off, so that would allow them to take some responsibility rather than going on new.
The old name and shame.
So, sorry, this is probably one part that I maybe overstepped that I probably should have included in the presentation, is how the system actually works, because that's actually quite an important part to understanding, well, where we can position the response and anything that we might want to do. So within the ACT, Henley has said, the builder's got a lot of control, which I think is quite a reasonable assessment of the situation. Builder puts the block of lands put forward, it's taken over by the builder, they develop it. They put forward the proposals and the plans. They have to do detailed plans that go to an independent certifier. So the certifier is not a government certifier, it is their own one. So the certifier will then look at the plans, make sure that they're all up to the code. Now the code is a national code, a building code, and that's done by industry and reviewed every year. So they make sure everything is to code in the plans, and then the builder can start the construction. Once the construction is finished, it's certified by the it's signed off by the certifier to say that it's all been done fine, and then it's handed over to the individual. So in your case, you. The individual then has, as you said, a 90-day. There is some instances where I have heard of 1 year recourses, but it is a very litigation-heavy recourse process. So what you'd be finding is if you have a defect, you have to go back to the builder and say, well, there's this issue, can you please come back and fix it? And it does come down a bit to the builder. I mean, you know, I'll be completely honest with you, I've heard some complete horror stories as to how builders have responded to issues that are out there that people are having that are actually, you know, on the face of it, quite genuine issues that should be responded to by a builder. There's other builders who are really fantastic and will come back and fix everything. So there's that huge variability in there as to, because the system is set up as a litigation, you know, my terms, I guess, shorthand, litigation heavy aspect. So you go back to the builder, it's all under contractual law, you haven't agreed this, you haven't agreed that, your recourse is largely through the legal system. It does mean that when you do come to the ACT government, the avenues that are available to us outside of that legal process are not necessarily as much as, you know, the individual might like. So yeah, they're all issues that have come up through this, and I completely take on board your view, and it's consistent with what I'm hearing from other people, and certainly something that we're really focused on. Well, how do we actually make it easier for people to get these issues sorted?
The builder should be banned from any of the ACT ballots.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else who's not with the Community Council? Okay. So Kevin, you can ask your question first, and then pass it out.
The problem is that an individual, when they build a house, is in a very you do it once, right? Or maybe twice, but you are not in a very strong position when there is a problem with the builder. So I built our house on a block of land, and we bought the land and we did the whole thing. And the problem is that I don't have much clout as a person on my own. The old way in which we used to do it, I think was much better, because if we have government inspections, then the government can take some responsibility if the inspections are not correct. This privatisation of the inspectors, I think, was a disaster from the point of view of the individual household. We need someone on our side to take some responsibility, and that is done through the inspection system. So my suggestion is that you go back to the government's employing inspectors and taking responsibility that the inspections are done correctly, because the government is able to hold a lot more clout than we as individuals have. You can?
Yeah, okay. I'll take that more as a comment, but I will say you're not the first person to raise that opinion with me. So, yeah.
Right, and then left-handed.
Hi. So I'm this past 1 year anniversary of living in a two-bedroom apartment on one of those apartment buildings along Flemington Road. So, you know, went out to bought what on paper was a fantastic 6.5 Energy Star rated building. Awesome. So it performed fantastically over winter, but basically it's a furnace over summer. Has condensation issues over winter. And it's kind of like, well, now that in there, really, I've now got to somehow adapt that apartment for shortcomings of probably really a building design flaw, and so really, you know, this is unsort of, I don't know, there's not much recourse there.
Yeah.
Got it.
So, yes. Okay. So with that, one avenue you could potentially look at is, even though you'll have the maintenance period might be over, there is warranties on the building. So depending on the problem, there is recourse through some of that. And some of the issues that have come to us, that's essentially where we're saying is, well, can we do anything on warranties? As far as the energy rating, yes, I agree with you. I think Canberra's a very unique climate in Australia in the sense that we have very cold winters and we have very hot summers. and making sure that our building design is responding to both of those so that you don't have the issues that you're having of a furnace. I actually live in one of those apartments on Flemington Road too. To give you my own experience, when I bought off plan as well, and I actually asked them to change the glass because it was single pane glass, and I said no, I'd like something with better insulating properties. So I've actually found that to give you my horror story, they didn't actually put the glass in that I paid for and was under my contract, so I had to get them to replace all the glass in my apartment, but it gave me the benefit of living with the standard glass and living with the changed glass, and it makes a difference. So it comes to those upfront things of, well, what can we actually do to make sure we're getting it right in the first place, rather than putting it in a position where it comes to, where you're saying, well, what can I do now that I've got it? Was it just the condensation comment and the heating? Yeah. So I think as far as the build quality, look, we've been really focused on the quality of the actual construction and the actual build, so making sure that it's the structure and that it has the integrity that it should have. Your comment, I think, would go into a slightly different area of, well, how can we improve the design of buildings, particularly to be responsive to our climate and our environment, which is another, I think, piece of work slightly separate to this, but one that I'm also interested in and looking at. So, yeah. Any other questions?
Andrew? No, others? Yes, Andrew?
Just given how much the government's been pushing mixed-use developments, I'm just interested in what are you actually doing in response to Gary's comments earlier of the issues that have occurred where you have like residential and restaurants using the same spaces?
I didn't, because we were sitting this week and I had to wait till sitting had finished and come, so I haven't heard all of Gary's presentation, so forgive me if I say something wrong or don't respond quite to what he said. Please give me the benefit of the doubt for the half I didn't hear. The strata arrangements that Gary was talking about are probably a little bit outside of the work of build quality as well, and again, it's a different piece of work. There is work going on to look at, well, how do we do the strata arrangements as we move to different living arrangements? I do live in a mixed-use building myself, and we have quite a good relationship with the commercial tenants within our building, and we've found that it's quite positive in the way that we work together to overcome the issues that both sides are having, because the commercials have had some issues with the residents and vice versa too. I guess where you wouldn't have the benefit of that is if you don't have a good relationship between the two, if one party is saying not interested in listening. As far as it goes, these are a newer building type for Canberra, and I think there's still quite a few of those issues are still coming to the fore. I think we're aware of some of them, but quite a few of the others aren't. One of the discussions I've been having with the Minister for Regulatory Services is, well, what can we actually look at, because it's a regulatory issue on an ongoing basis, to actually make this better for people, because there are a lot of people who want to live in this type of housing. We need to make sure that they're not being disadvantaged unintentionally by it. I don't know if that, don't know if that quite gets to the guts of your answer, but yeah, your question, yeah.
Follow on, and you can repeat it straight into my was, it's also a design question. If you design right in the first place, you can avoid it.
Yeah, so Andrew said it's also a design question, and I agree with you there. Yeah. Looking at that comes to, I think, getting the proposals that are put forward by developers to be a little bit more thought through in what they're proposing, perhaps. Yeah.
All right. Any other ones? Yep. Okay, just over here first. I'll do a delivery, or are you happy to catch? Yeah.
Going back to inspecting of newly built buildings, my impression, I don't know if this is correct, but when we bought our house, it was certified, but they didn't seem to actually do a visual inspection. It seemed to be a paper process, because they'd signed off that certain things had been done correctly, which we found out later they hadn't been. And they were quite... one of them was quite obvious. We didn't have an electricity meter, for example, and that was certified as being there. So it seems to be... Is that right? Is it a paper process? Are they supposed to come in person? I think that would help.
From the briefings I've had from the directorates and going through this, it does seem to be a heavily paper-reliant process. Which, based on the feedback here, one might say the community would prefer a different response. And that's certainly something that we're going to have as an ongoing discussion. And it's not just the end. The other part through this is there are critical points within a construction process that perhaps might warrant a little bit more oversight in some way, shape or form. So particularly for the waterproofing, a lot of the issues comes around the laying of the membrane and the integrity of the membrane in the building. And that, if you inspected that at the end of the building, you wouldn't know. It's inside a building. So when that's being laid, whether we need to do a bit more of a focus on that. Another issue with the waterproofing is particularly with balconies, and the plans all say the right thing, but it's one of the things, if you get it a couple of millimetres out, you get a very different outcome. So just, how do we manage that through what is actually quite a complex build process? So, what's the right regulatory response for it, I guess is the question.
Anyone else? I've certainly had individuals come to me and bitterly unhappy about a particular builder, so you've got plenty of friends out there.
I think that one that's been in the news is ESC, and I think that the issue's not going to necessarily be isolated to them, but where people are setting up companies for a particular development, and they can walk away from that company once it's finished, and what are the responsibilities going forward. So they can set up a development proprietary limited, and then set up B development proprietary limited, and then what's the protections in place there?
So, the phoenixing of companies. Look, ESC has been in the newspapers quite a bit, and there are cases. I mean, ESC, and I have been talking to some people in ESC. ESC is quite an extreme case. It's also what are some of them. Our focus has been not just what are the extreme cases, but what's some perhaps the systemic issues, if there is. So, look, I mean, I take your comments, definitely the phoenixing of companies where a company will come along and build something and then say, oh no, we've gone bust, and then they'll go set up another company, and so you don't have those recourses through the legal system because the company is bankrupt. That is definitely an issue. It's one that's being looked at federally, which is the other complication within this. Is what can we do at a local level has been our focus, because that's the jurisdiction that I'm at, and there is quite a bit happening federally, which would also play into this.
Yeah, I know you do lease.
Yeah. So that is a big one that's coming, and completely take your point, and we'll continue to pass on to my federal colleagues that we would like to see something done on the phoenixing of companies. Yeah. Henley had one more question.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, okay. I'll come back to my closing remarks.
Thanks. This is probably off topic, but still Gungahlin related. The buses. On the Labor Party promises before the election, one of the election promises was to get the trail bus running from Gungahlin to Tuggeranong. Well, I don't think, which never happened. And someone from the transport came last time. They said, they couldn't get any data to do it because they never tried the bus service. Obviously, that's why they haven't got enough data to go from Gungahlin to Tuggeranong. So that's one thing was missing. I was hoping to chase up with Megan as well, because she was the one who kept saying that it will happen. And the other thing with the bus service from Moncrief, and they've been talking about the light rail. Only we got to wait till light rail and stuff. So, we should able to accommodate probably just in peak hours. Just to get the people moving. Okay.
No, this is with residents moving into Moncrief, and I know we have some in the room. And also, I know Jacka is another one that's quite interested in bus services. So it is an ongoing conversation that I've been having with the Transport Minister. Certainly, the position that has always come back is that they're looking at it in the context of light rail. The discussion I've been having with her is could we not consider that perhaps a little bit sooner? What I would encourage everyone who lives in those areas to do is that there is another round of consultation coming up. So we just had the consultation on the rapid systems that have come out. There will now be a consultation on the suburban buses. Put your feedback into that. That's the best place, the best channel to get it straight back to the government. I will certainly continue to do my part in advocating as well, but the more voices that channel themselves through that channel, the more position we'll have to have the conversation.
And with the bus from Gungahlin to Tuggeranong.
Okay, that one I'd have to talk to you about a little bit more. because I'm not sure what conversations you had with Megan and where that's up to, but I'm happy to discuss that with you in detail. Yeah, after. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for saying on that, because we've been lobbying on that quite hard. I'm going to wrap the meeting now. Thank you very much, Suzanne. That was excellent. I would encourage you that if you are trying to get out to the community, you let us know, and so we can make sure it goes out through our channels as well. We're certainly very supportive of anything that's trying to collect information from the community, as long as it's for the community and not necessarily for other purposes that might be maintaining contact databases. And there's been a bit of that going around. So
I will say, look, I do have a survey on my website. I've got some cards here with links to that if anyone wanted to put their comments in, just to make everyone comfortable with what's going on with that feedback. It's strictly for this purpose of gathering the information. It's been quite good for us because we've been able to go back to people and explore some of the issues in detail, and also as other things have come up, go back and see go back to other people and say, well, is this something you're experiencing too, and see if it's a systemic issue or if it's an isolated case. So that's largely what we're using the input for, is to actually get a proper view of what the circumstance is.
we're just concerned that if people do provide their details, they don't end up. So we need looking for an explicit statement that is just for the purpose of the survey. Cool. Thank you very much. Really useful, and a common issue, and one that's very frustrating for our community because we're often the new build community. So that's great. Thank you. Thank you everyone for tonight. We usually have any other items. If anyone's got another item that'll fit into 60 seconds, I'm happy to entertain it. I thought not. Okay, well, thank you very much for coming along. It's good stuff for the year, and we'll see you again in March. By the way, Active Canberra and the Transport Canberra both were scheduled for speaking today, but weren't quite ready, didn't have things quite in place, so we expect to have them next month. So look forward to that. Thanks very much.